Was there ever a time when childhood ended with a marriage treaty? When power was traded in cradles and alliances were sealed with vows spoken by children? When the destinies of entire kingdoms rested on the shoulders of little girls, barely out of their nurseries, wearing crowns and wedding rings instead of playing with dolls? Welcome to the medieval world, from the 11th to the 15th centuries. A time when being a queen often meant being a child bride, and their fates were as unpredictable as the tides. Number 1. Empress Matilda. Born in 1102, Matilda was the daughter of King Henry I of England and his first wife, Matilda of Scotland. From her earliest days, Matilda was destined for a life far beyond the ordinary. Her father, a shrewd and powerful monarch, saw in his daughter not just a beloved child, but a valuable asset in the complex game of European politics. She was a granddaughter of William the Conqueror, a descendant of the Anglo-Saxon kings to her mother, and her bloodline held immense significance for consolidating power in England. The grand stage of European diplomacy was set for Matilda's future before she had even learned to properly speak. At the tender age of 8, in 1110, Matilda was sent across the English Channel to Germany. This journey, a long and arduous one for any traveler, must have been particularly bewildering for a young girl. She was not traveling for a visit, but for a destiny chosen for her by her father. Marriage to Henry V, the Holy Roman Emperor. The Holy Roman Empire at this time was a vast and influential entity, encompassing much of Central Europe, and an alliance with its emperor was a monumental achievement for the English crown. The betrothal ceremony itself was a spectacle of medieval grandeur, designed to impress and solidify the political bond. It took place on April 10, 1110, in the city of Utrecht. Matilda, a small figure amidst the towering dignitaries, was formally engaged to a man nearly 20 years her senior. The sheer scale of the event, with its noble attendees, religious solemnity, and elaborate preparations, underscored the gravity of the union. It was not a personal choice, but a dynastic imperative, a transaction of power and prestige. Following the betrothal, Matilda was not immediately married, but instead placed under the care of her future husband, the Emperor Henry V. This was a common practice for royal child brides, allowing them to be educated in the customs and language of their new court, molding them into suitable empresses. For Matilda, this meant immersion in the sophisticated, often tumultuous world of the Holy Roman Empire. She learned German, absorbed the intricacies of imperial court etiquette, and began to understand the immense responsibilities that would soon fall upon her. The actual marriage took place 3 years later, in 1114, when Matilda was just 12 years old. The location was the city of Mainz, and the ceremony was even more magnificent than the betrothal. Chroniclers of the time described the immense crowds that gathered, the lavish feasts, and the dazzling displays of wealth and power. Matilda, now slightly older but still very much a child, became Empress of the Holy Roman Empire, a title of unparalleled prestige in the Western world. She was crowned by the Archbishop of Mainz, and the union was widely celebrated as a triumph of diplomacy for both England and the Empire. Despite her youth, Matilda quickly adapted to her role as empress. Historical accounts suggest she was intelligent and politically astute, learning rapidly from her imperial husband. She traveled with him extensively across the empire, attending diets, engaging in diplomatic negotiations, and even participating in military campaigns. Her presence lent legitimacy and grace to the emperor's court, and she was clearly valued by Henry V, who entrusted her with responsibilities that went beyond mere ceremonial duties. In 1117, during the emperor's conflict with the papacy, Matilda accompanied Henry to Italy, and in 1118 she was even crowned a second time by Pope Paschal II in Rome. Further cementing her status as empress, she witnessed firsthand the fierce struggles between secular rulers and the church, battles that shaped the political landscape of Europe. Life at the imperial court was not without its challenges. The Holy Roman Empire was a sprawling, decentralized entity, frequently plagued by internal conflicts and external pressures. Matilda as Empress was at the heart of this volatile environment. She navigated political intrigues, supported her husband in his struggles against rebellious German princes and the Pope, and learned the art of governance and diplomacy. Her early exposure to such a high stakes world undoubtedly forged her into a formidable woman. Tragically, Henry V died in 1125, leaving Matilda a widow at the age of 23. This was a pivotal moment in her life. She had no children, with the emperor a significant disappointment in a dynastic marriage, and her position in Germany became precarious. She returned to England, her childhood home, in 1126, bringing with her the impressive imperial regalia and a wealth of experience. Upon her return, Matilda's life took an unexpected turn. Her father, King Henry I, had lost his only legitimate son, William Edelin, in the White Ship disaster of 1120. This left the English throne without a clear male heir. In a truly unprecedented move, Henry I declared Matilda his heir and compelled his barons to swear an oath of fealty to her. This was a radical departure from traditional succession laws, which favored male heirs, and it immediately set the stage for future conflict. To further secure her position, and perhaps provide a male heir, Matilda was married a second time, in 1128, at the age of 26, to Geoffrey Plantagenet, Count of Anjou. This marriage was deeply unpopular with many English and Norman barons, who resented the union with a man of lower status and from a rival house. Despite the political friction, the marriage did produce heirs, most notably Henry, who would later become King Henry II of England and the founder of the powerful Plantagenet dynasty. When Henry I died in 1135, the oaths sworn to Matilda were largely ignored. Her cousin Stephen of Blois swiftly seized the English throne, sparking a brutal civil war known as the Anarchy. For nearly 2 decades, Matilda fought relentlessly for her rightful claim to the English crown. She personally led armies, endured sieges, and navigated the treacherous political landscape of a divided kingdom. She proved herself a capable military commander and a determined ruler, earning both admiration and animosity. Matilda's struggle was marked by both triumphs and setbacks. She successfully captured Stephen in 1141 and briefly held London, but her severe demeanor and unwillingness to compromise alienated many of her supporters. She was forced to flee London and the Civil War dragged on. Though she was never formally crowned Queen of England, she styled herself Lady of the English and maintained a court and a significant base of power. Her tenacity was legendary, and she refused to yield her claim. Ultimately, the conflict was resolved through negotiation rather than decisive military victory. In 1153, the Treaty of Winchester was signed, acknowledging Matilda's son Henry as Stephen's heir. This agreement ensured the Plantagenet succession and brought an end to the anarchy. Matilda herself stepped back from the direct conflict, allowing her son to take the reins. Matilda spent the remainder of her life in Normandy, playing an influential role as an advisor to her son, King Henry II. She oversaw the administration of Normandy and often mediated disputes, demonstrating her continued political acumen and authority. She witnessed her son become one of England's most powerful monarchs, realizing her ambition for her lineage, if not for her personal reign. Empress Matilda died in 1167 at the age of 65, a remarkably long life for the medieval period. Her story is one of unwavering determination, from a child bride thrust into the highest echelons of power to a formidable claimant to a throne, who, though never crowned in England, laid the foundation for one of its most important royal dynasties. Her tomb bears the epitaph, "Here lies Henry's daughter, mother of Henry, wife of Henry, a great burden to the English." It captures the essence of her extraordinary life, a woman defined by her powerful male relations, yet who forged her own path with remarkable strength and resilience. Her early marriage as a child set the stage for a life of unprecedented challenge and achievement, shaping the course of English history for centuries to come. She was a woman who navigated the complexities of imperial power, the brutality of civil war, and the expectations placed upon her from a very young age, always holding fast to her belief in her own right. Number 2. Isabella of France. Born in 1295, Isabella of France was the youngest surviving child of King Philip IV of France and Queen Joan I of Navarre. Her father, known as Philip the Fair, was one of the most powerful and imposing monarchs in Europe, a ruler known for his administrative reforms, his conflicts with the papacy, and his relentless pursuit of French royal authority. Isabella grew up in the sophisticated and politically charged atmosphere of the French court, a place where royal children were acutely aware of their value as instruments of statecraft. From a young age, she was known for her beauty, described by contemporary chroniclers as the most beautiful woman in the world. The alliance between England and France was a constant, uneasy dance throughout the medieval period, often oscillating between marriage treaties and open warfare. Isabella, as a daughter of France, was a prime candidate to bridge the gap between these two rival powers. Her hand in marriage was sought by Edward I of England for his son Edward of Caernarfon, the future Edward II. The negotiations were protracted and complex, reflecting the deep-seated rivalries and mutual suspicions between the two kingdoms. After years of diplomatic maneuvering, a treaty was finally agreed upon, solidifying Isabella's destiny. The marriage took place on January 25, 1308, in the city of Boulogne-sur-Mer. In northern France, Isabella was just 12 years old. Her husband Edward II was 23. The ceremony was a grand affair, attended by the highest nobility of both England and France, underscoring the political significance of the union. French chroniclers noted the splendor of the event, the lavish attire, and the solemn vows exchanged. Isabella, though a child, was formally transformed into Queen of England, stepping into a role of immense responsibility and visibility in a foreign land. From the very beginning, Isabella's life in England was fraught with difficulties. Her husband, Edward II, quickly showed a clear and open preference for his male companions, most notably Piers Gaveston, a Gascon knight. Edward's obsession with Gaveston, whom he showered with titles, wealth, and power, deeply offended the English nobility and pushed Isabella to the periphery of her husband's affections in the court. She found herself isolated, a young queen whose primary function to provide an heir and an alliance was overshadowed by her husband's controversial relationships. Despite these personal hardships, Isabella fulfilled her dynastic duty, giving birth to 4 children with Edward II, Edward III in 1312, John of Eltham in 1316, and Joan of the Tower in 1321. The birth of a male heir, the future Edward III, was particularly important, ensuring the continuation of the Plantagenet line and giving Isabella a degree of security and influence. As the years passed, the political situation in England grew increasingly unstable. Edward II's continued favoritism towards new male favorites after Gaveston's execution by the barons, particularly Hugh Despenser, the younger, alienated the English nobility. Further, the Despensers, father and son, essentially controlled the king and amassed vast wealth and power, often at the expense of others. Isabella found herself increasingly at odds with the Despensers, who actively sought to undermine her position and isolate her from her husband. They stripped her of her lands and revenues, denied her access to her children, and even restricted her personal freedom by the mid-1320s. Isabella's patience. She was not merely a neglected queen. She was a queen whose power and dignity were being systematically eroded. In 1325, a critical opportunity arose. Her brother, Charles IV of France, requested Edward II to come to France to pay homage for the Duchy of Aquitaine. Edward, unwilling to leave the Despensers, sent Isabella as his proxy. This journey to France was a turning point for Isabella. Once in France, Isabella refused to return to England. She became a rallying point for English exiles who opposed Edward II and the Despensers. In Paris, she reunited with Roger Mortimer, an exiled English baron who had been imprisoned by Edward II, but escaped to France. Mortimer became her lover and her closest political ally. Together, they plotted an invasion of England, fueled by their shared grievances and a desire to depose Edward II. In September 1326, Isabella Mortimer and a small force of mercenaries and English exiles landed in England. Their invasion was met with widespread support. Many nobles disaffected by Edward II's misrule and the tyranny of the Despensers flocked to their banner. Edward II and the Despensers found themselves abandoned. Hugh Despenser the Elder was captured and summarily executed, and Hugh Despenser the Younger was captured shortly after, suffering a brutal execution in Herod, reflecting the deep hatred he had incurred. Edward II himself was captured in November 1326. Under pressure from Isabella and Mortimer, Parliament declared him unfit to rule. In a move unprecedented in English history, Edward II was formally deposed in January 1327. His son, the 15-year-old Edward III, was proclaimed king. Isabella and Mortimer effectively ruled England as regents for the young king. The exact circumstances of Edward II's death remain a subject of historical debate and speculation. He died in Berkeley Castle in September 1327. While official reports attributed his death to natural causes, rumors persisted that he was brutally murdered on Isabella and Mortimer's orders. Regardless of the precise details, his death consolidated. For the next few years, Isabella and Mortimer governed England. Isabella was recognized as the she-wolf of France by later chroniclers, a testament to her fierce determination and ruthless ambition. She wielded immense power, making political decisions and controlling royal patronage. However, their rule became increasingly unpopular. Mortimer, in particular, amassed vast wealth and behaved like an uncrowned king, alienating many nobles who had initially supported Isabella. The young King Edward III, growing into his own power, also resented Mortimer's dominance over his mother and the kingdom. In 1330, Edward III, now 18, staged a coup. With a small group of trusted companions, he surprised Mortimer and Isabella at Nottingham Castle. Mortimer was arrested and swiftly brought to trial. He was condemned as a traitor and executed at Tyburn. This decisive action brought an end to Isabella's active political power. Isabella was not executed, perhaps out of respect for her royal blood and her status as the king's mother. Instead, she was placed under house arrest, initially at Berkhamsted Castle and later at Castle Rising in Norfolk. Though her political influence was gone, she was treated with a degree of comfort and respect. She was allowed to receive visitors, and her son, Edward III, visited her regularly and provided her with a generous allowance. Isabella of France lived for another 28 years after Mortimer's downfall. She died in 1358, at the age of 63, a truly remarkable lifespan for the era. Her final years were spent largely in dignified retirement, but she remained a figure of immense historical significance. Her story, from a child bride navigating a hostile court to a queen who overthrew her own husband and seized power, is one of the most dramatic and controversial in English history. She demonstrated extraordinary resilience in a relentless pursuit of power in a world where women were often expected to be passive figures. Her early marriage was merely the first step in a life that defied conventional expectations and left an indelible mark on the English monarchy. Number 3. Margaret of France. Born in 1158, Margaret of France was the eldest daughter of King Louis VII of France and his second wife, Constance of Castile. Her father, Louis VII, was a pious and somewhat indecisive monarch, but he was keenly aware of the strategic importance of his daughters in the intricate tapestry of medieval European politics. France and England, two of the most powerful kingdoms in Western Europe, were often rivals, their borders contested, their interests clashing. Marriage alliances were one of the primary tools used to forge peace and cement diplomatic bonds between them. Margaret's birth coincided with a period of intense rivalry between France and England, particularly concerning the disputed territories of the Vexin, a strategically vital border region. King Henry II of England, a dynamic and ambitious ruler who had inherited the vast Angevin Empire encompassing England, Normandy, Aquitaine, and more, sought to secure his borders and prevent further French expansion. A marriage between their children was seen as the most effective way to achieve a truce, even if a temporary one. The agreement for Margaret's marriage to Henry the young king, Henry II's son and heir, was negotiated when Margaret was barely out of infancy. In 1158, when Margaret was just 3 years old, a treaty was signed at Gisors, formally betrothing her to Henry. Terms of the treaty were clear. Margaret would bring the Vexin as her dowry. This was a crucial concession by King Louis VII, demonstrating the high political stakes involved in this seemingly innocent union. Transfer of such a valuable territory underscored that this was not merely a personal union, but a calculated political maneuver. The actual marriage ceremony took place on November 2, 1160, in the presence of various church officials and nobles. Margaret was still only 3 years old, and Henry the young king was 5. This extreme youth meant the marriage was not consummated, but it was legally binding, a political fact rather than a personal relationship. The swiftness of the marriage after the Gisors Treaty was significant. Henry II, ever the pragmatist, was keen to secure the Vexin as quickly as possible. The Archbishop of Rouen performed the ceremony, solidifying the legitimacy of the union in the eyes of the Church. After the marriage, Margaret was taken to England to be raised in the court of her future father-in-law, King Henry II. This was a common practice for child brides, allowing them to assimilate into their new culture, learn the language, and be molded into suitable future queens. For Margaret, this meant growing up in the formidable shadow of Henry II and his equally formidable wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine. The Angevin court was a vibrant but often tumultuous place, filled with brilliant minds, political intrigue, and family drama. Margaret spent her childhood and adolescence at the English court, alongside her husband, Henry the young king. Though they were officially married, their relationship was initially that of playmates and companions rather than spouses. As they grew older, however, the complexities of their positions became more apparent. In 1170, in a move designed to secure the succession and ease the transition of power, Henry the young king was crowned King of England during his father's lifetime. Margaret, by his side, was also crowned Queen of England at Winchester Cathedral. This was a highly unusual occurrence, creating the unique situation of 2 reigning kings and 2 reigning queens in England simultaneously. Despite her elevated status, as Queen Margaret's life was not without its difficulties. The relationship between Henry II and his sons, particularly Henry the young king, was notoriously fraught with tension. The sons, eager for power and frustrated by their father's reluctance to cede authority, rebelled against him multiple times. Margaret found herself caught in the middle of these bitter family conflicts. In 1173, Henry the young king, along with his brothers Richard and Geoffrey and their mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, launched a major rebellion against Henry II. Margaret supported her husband, even though it meant opposing her father-in-law, the powerful King Henry II. During these rebellions, Margaret showed considerable loyalty to her husband. She traveled with him, endured the hardships of campaigning, and shared in his frustrations. The 1173 rebellion, though ultimately unsuccessful, saw extensive fighting across England and France. Margaret experienced the harsh realities of medieval warfare and political instability firsthand. These conflicts, though not directly involving her, shaped the environment in which she lived and the loyalties she maintained. Margaret gave birth to a son in 1177 named William. This was a significant event as it provided an heir for Henry the young king and thus for the English throne. However, the child was born prematurely and died shortly after birth. This loss was a great disappointment and added to the stresses already present in Margaret's life. The absence of a living heir from this marriage remained a source of concern for the Angevin dynasty. In 1182, the tensions within the Angevin family flared up again. Henry the young king, frustrated by his father's refusal to grant him more power, and constantly in debt, quarreled violently with his brother Richard. Conflict escalated into open warfare among the brothers in Aquitaine. Margaret, once again, followed her husband, enduring the rigors of campaign life. Tragically, Henry the young king fell ill with dysentery in 1183 while campaigning in Limousin. Despite the efforts of physicians, his condition rapidly worsened. He died on June 11, 1183, at the age of 28. Margaret, at 25, was left a widow, her life taking another unexpected turn. Her husband, who had been crowned king during his father's lifetime, never actually reigned in his own right, and Margaret's status as a crowned queen was suddenly without a functional royal consort. Following her husband's death, Margaret's position in England became tenuous. She no longer had a direct claim to the English throne through her husband, and she returned to France. Her father, Louis VII, had died earlier, and her half-brother, Philip II Augustus, now reigned as King of France. Philip II Augustus was a shrewd and ambitious monarch, determined to reclaim territories from the Angevin Empire and expand French royal power. Margaret lived a relatively quiet life in France for several years. However, her royal lineage and previous marriage made her a valuable political pawn once more. In 1186, at the age of 28, she married a second time, this time to King Bela III of Hungary. This was another strategically important union, forging an alliance between the French and Hungarian kingdoms. Margaret traveled to Hungary, a distant land, to take up her new role as queen. Margaret of France, Queen of Hungary, lived for another 11 years in her new kingdom. She had no children with Bela II, but she fulfilled her duties as queen consort. She died in 1197 at the age of 39, while on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Her death in Tyre, in what was then the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem, suggests a final act of piety, a reflection of the deep religious sentiments prevalent in the medieval era. Her life, from a child bride given as a political pawn, to a crowned queen, caught in family feuds, to a queen in distant kingdom, exemplifies the complex and often unpredictable fates of royal women in the Middle Ages, their personal lives inextricably tied to the grand strategies of kings. Kingdoms. She was a woman who navigated changing allegiances in distant lands, always adapting to the role prescribed for her by her birth and political necessity. Number 4. Isabella of Valois. Born in 1389, Isabella of Valois was the second daughter of King Charles VI of France and Isabeau of Bavaria. Her father, Charles VI, was known as Charles the Beloved in his early reign, but later as Charles the Mad, due to recurring bouts of mental illness that plagued him throughout much of his adult life. This meant Isabella grew up in a French court that was increasingly unstable and fractured, marked by political infighting among powerful dukes vying for influence over the incapacitated king. The 100 Years' War, a protracted conflict between England and France, was still raging, though periods of truce offered fleeting moments of peace. The English King Richard II was seeking a lasting peace with France. He was a complex figure, artistic and cultured, but also prone to autocratic tendencies that alienated many of his barons. Richard's first wife, Anne of Bohemia, had died childless in 1394, leaving him without an heir. A new marriage, particularly to a French princess, offered the tantalizing prospect of a dynastic alliance that could bring a definitive end to the costly and devastating war. Negotiations for Isabella's hand began shortly after Anne's death. Despite Isabella's extreme youth, King Richard II was determined to secure this alliance. The French, too, saw the benefits of a truce, even if a fragile one. The age difference between the prospective bride and groom was significant. Richard was 28 and Isabella was just 6 years old. Such a disparity was not uncommon in royal marriages of the era, where political utility far outweighed personal compatibility or age. The marriage treaty was signed in March 1396. It stipulated not only Isabella's marriage to Richard II, but also a 28-year truce between England and France, a testament to the immense political weight carried by this child bride. The dowry was substantial, further sweetening the deal for the English. The agreement was a major diplomatic coup for Richard II, who hoped it would stabilize his reign and bring an end to the long-standing hostilities. The marriage ceremony took place on November 4th, 1396, in the small French town of Calais, a strategic English outpost on the continent. Isabella, a mere 7 years old, was presented to her future husband. Richard II, according to chroniclers, was reportedly gentle and kind towards his child bride, though the nature of their relationship was clearly that of guardian and ward, rather than husband and wife. The sheer scale of the event, with two kings present, Richard II and Charles VI, and their retinues, was a spectacle of medieval diplomacy. Isabella was crowned Queen of England in Westminster Abbey shortly after her arrival in England, marking her formal ascension to the throne, though her young age meant her role was largely ceremonial. Isabella lived at the English court, primarily at Eltham Palace, and was given her own extensive household. She was provided with a queen's education, though she was still very much a child, with her ladies-in-waiting often acting as her caretakers. Historical accounts suggest that Richard II, perhaps lacking a child of his own, treated Isabella with affection and consideration. He sent her gifts and visited her regularly. He ensured she was well provided for and protected. She represented his hope for peace and a secure future, and he evidently genuinely liked her. However, Isabella's time as queen was short-lived and turbulent due to the political unrest within England itself. Richard II's increasingly authoritarian rule, his heavy taxation, and his perceived favoritism towards a small group of courtiers alienated the English nobility. His banishment of Henry Bolingbroke, Duke of Hereford, in 1398 proved to be a fatal mistake. In 1399, while Richard II was campaigning in Ireland, Henry Bolingbroke returned to England, ostensibly to reclaim his rightful inheritance. He quickly garnered widespread support from disaffected nobles and the populace. The country rapidly turned against Richard II. Isabella, still only 10 years old, was initially kept at Wallingford Castle, a royal stronghold. As events unfolded, she was essentially a prisoner of state, a valuable pawn in the power struggle. Richard II, upon his return from Ireland, found his support evaporated. He was captured and ultimately forced to abdicate his throne. Henry Bolingbroke, now Henry IV, usurped the crown in September 1399. The deposition of a king was an unprecedented and shocking event in English history, fundamentally altering the political landscape. Isabella, as the deposed king's queen, was now in a precarious position. Her marriage to Richard II was the symbol of the very alliance Henry IV wished to dismantle. She was moved to various castles and placed under close supervision. The new king, Henry IV, initially contemplated marrying Isabella to his own son, the future Henry V, to legitimize his usurpation and maintain the peace with France. However, Isabella staunchly refused. Despite her youth, she remained fiercely loyal to her deposed husband, a surprising display of character for such a young girl. She refused to marry his usurper's son, maintaining her allegiance to the man she had been married to. The fate of Richard II remains a matter of historical debate, but he died in Pontefract Castle in February 1400, almost certainly murdered on Henry IV's orders. This left Isabella a widow at the age of 10, effectively powerless and adrift in a foreign land. Her personal refusal to marry Henry IV's son further complicated her situation. Her father, Charles VI of France, demanded her return. After complex negotiations, Isabella was finally allowed to return to France in 1401, leaving England, the country where she had been queen for good. She returned with her dowry, a testament to her family's efforts to ensure her continued financial security. Back in France, Isabella lived under the care of her family. Despite her traumatic past and her early widowhood, her royal status ensured that she would be a valuable prize in the European marriage market once more. In 1406, at the age of 17, she was married a second time to her cousin Charles, Duke of Orleans. This marriage was intended to strengthen the French royal house and secure the Orleans family's position. Isabella's second marriage was short-lived. She gave birth to a daughter, Joan, in 1409. Tragically, Isabella died in childbirth shortly after, at the age of 19. Her young life, marked by an early political marriage, the deposition and death of her first husband, and her own early demise, highlights the vulnerability of medieval queens, even those from the most powerful royal houses. Her story is a poignant example of a child forced into a political role far beyond her years, navigating treacherous waters with surprising resolve, only to have her life cut short by the perils of childbirth, a common and dangerous reality for women in the medieval period. She was a queen defined by her early marriage, the upheaval of her husband's overthrow, and her steadfast, surprising loyalty. Number 5. Margaret, Maid of Norway. Born in 1283, Margaret was the only child of King Eric II of Norway and Margaret of Scotland, who herself was the daughter of King Alexander III of Scotland. From the moment of her birth, Margaret's life was steeped in high stakes, dynastic politics. Her maternal grandfather, Alexander III, was the last direct male line descendant of the Scottish royal house of Canmore. This meant that Margaret, to her mother, was a key figure in the line of succession to the Scottish throne. Her existence alone was a matter of great national importance for Scotland. In 1284, just 1 year after Margaret's birth, a tragic accident occurred. Alexander III of Scotland, her grandfather, died. After falling from his horse, this left the Scottish throne in a perilous state. Alexander's 2 sons had already died without heirs, and his only surviving child was Margaret's mother, who also died shortly after the king. Suddenly, the infant Margaret, living far away in Norway, became the sole direct heir to the Scottish throne. This placed an immense burden on a child who was not even old enough to walk. The Scottish nobility, facing a succession crisis and fearing a civil war, had no immediate alternative. In 1286, they formally recognized Margaret as Queen of Scotland. This remarkable decision meant that an infant, barely able to understand the world around her, was officially the sovereign of a proud and independent kingdom. Her status as queen was acknowledged by papal dispensation in 1288, further solidifying her claim. The Maid of Norway, as she came to be known, represented Scotland's hopes for continued independence and peace. The guardianship of the kingdom was entrusted to a group of 6 regents, known as the Guardians of Scotland. These powerful nobles faced the daunting task of governing in the name of an absent child queen and protecting Scotland from external threats, particularly from its powerful southern neighbor, England. King Edward I of England, a shrewd and ambitious monarch, saw an opportunity in Scotland's fragile succession. He had long harbored ambitions of uniting the British Isles under English rule. Edward I proposed a marriage between the young Queen Margaret of Scotland and his own son Edward of Carnarvon, the future Edward II of England. This union would effectively merge the crowns of England and Scotland, fulfilling Edward I's long-held ambition through a dynastic alliance rather than outright conquest. The negotiations were intense and sensitive, with the Scottish Guardians keen to preserve Scotland's independence while acknowledging the strategic necessity of an alliance with England. In 1290, a treaty was signed at Bergen, formally agreeing to the marriage between Margaret and Edward. Terms of the treaty were carefully crafted to protect Scotland's distinct laws, customs, and church. It stipulated that Scotland would remain separate and divided from England according to its rightful boundaries, a testament to the Scottish determination to maintain their identity. Despite the protections, the underlying purpose of the marriage was clear: to unite the 2 crowns under one future king. The stage was set for Margaret's journey to Scotland, a journey that would fulfill her destiny as queen and bride. In September 1290, the 7-year-old Margaret set sail from Bergen, Norway, bound for her kingdom. She was accompanied by a small retinue, including a Norwegian bishop and other guardians. The voyage across the North Sea was long and notoriously perilous, especially for a young child. Tragically, fate intervened before Margaret could ever set foot on Scottish soil as its queen. During the journey, the young Queen Margaret fell ill. The exact nature of her illness is not definitively known, but given the conditions of medieval sea travel and the susceptibility of children to disease, it was likely a rapid and severe affliction. The ship was forced to put in at the Orkney Islands, then part of Norway. Margaret, Queen of Scotland, died on the Orkney Islands in late September or early October 1290. She was just 7 years old. Her body was later transported back to Norway and buried in Bergen. Her death, so young and so far from her kingdom, plunged Scotland back into an even more severe succession crisis. The Maid of Norway never had the chance to rule, never married, and never saw the land she was born to govern. Margaret's death had immediate and catastrophic consequences for Scotland. Without a clear heir, a host of claimants, known as the competitors, came forward, all with varying degrees of legitimacy to the throne. To avoid civil war, the Scottish nobles appealed to King Edward I of England to arbitrate the dispute. Edward, seizing the opportunity, declared himself overlord of Scotland, and ultimately chose John Balliol as king, but only after extracting significant concessions that undermined Scottish sovereignty. This decision, coupled with Edward I's subsequent heavy-handed actions, ignited the Wars of Scottish Independence, a brutal and prolonged conflict that lasted for decades and profoundly shaped the histories of both Scotland and England. The brief, tragic life of Margaret, Maid of Norway, an infant queen betrothed as a child, directly led to one of the most significant periods of strife and national identity formation in Scottish history. Her early death, a simple fact of medieval life, was a powerful catalyst for a century of conflict, proving that even the most fragile of lives could leave the largest of historical imprints. Her fate, determined by her lineage and cut short by disease, highlights the precarious existence of royal children in the medieval period, where a young life could hold the destiny of nations, and its abrupt end could unleash decades of war.